Sarah Martinez stood in line at the coffee shop, her sleeve rolled up just enough to reveal the edge of an intricate tattoo on her forearm. The black ink showed part of what looked like wings and a trident, but most people only caught a glimpse before making their assumptions. She had learned to expect the stares, the whispered comments, the judgmental looks that followed her wherever she went. The woman behind her in line, a well-dressed blonde in her 50s, leaned closer to her companion and spoke just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "I don't understand why young people ruin their bodies like that. Probably some gang symbol or drug reference. These millennials have no respect for themselves." Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw tightening slightly. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times since moving to the small coastal town of Millbrook 6 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had chosen this peaceful community specifically to escape judgment, only to find a different kind waiting for her. The barista, a college-aged kid with purple hair and multiple piercings, smiled warmly at Sarah when her turn came. "The usual, Miss Martinez? Large black coffee? No sugar?" "That's right, Tyler. Thanks." Sarah appreciated that Tyler never seemed to judge anyone. In a town where conformity was the unspoken rule, he stood out almost as much as she did. As she waited for her coffee, Sarah noticed the blonde woman still watching her with obvious disapproval. The woman's companion, an older man in a polo shirt and khakis, shook his head dismissively. "Probably can't even hold down a real job with all that ink showing. What respectable employer would hire someone like that?" Tyler handed Sarah her coffee with an apologetic look. He had obviously heard the comments too. Sarah forced a smile and dropped a $5 tip in his jar. "Have a good day, Tyler. You too, Miss Martinez. Don't let them get to you." As Sarah left the coffee shop, she heard the blonde woman make one final comment. "At least she seems polite, even if she looks like a criminal." Sarah walked the 3 blocks to her new job at Millbrook Marine Services, a small boat repair and charter company owned by Frank Henderson, a gruff but fair man in his 60s. Frank had hired her based purely on her mechanical skills and references, never once asking about her tattoos or making assumptions about her character. It was refreshing after months of job interviews that ended the moment potential employers saw her ink. The marina was bustling with activity as the summer tourist season was in full swing. Sarah made her way to the repair dock, where she was scheduled to work on a 35-foot sport fishing boat that had been having engine troubles. The owner, a wealthy businessman from the city, had been complaining loudly about the delay in repairs. "About time someone showed up," the man called out as Sarah approached with her toolbox. He was tall and thin, wearing expensive clothes that looked out of place at a working marina. "I hope you know what you're doing. This boat costs more than most people make in a year." Sarah nodded politely and began her inspection of the engine compartment. Within minutes, she had identified the problem: a faulty fuel pump that was starving the engine of gas at high RPMs. It was a relatively simple fix, but one that required precision and experience. As she worked, the boat owner hovered nearby, making increasingly condescending comments. "Are you sure you know how to handle expensive equipment like this? Maybe I should wait for one of the senior mechanics. You look pretty young to be working on something this complex." Sarah continued working without responding, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she removed the faulty pump. She had learned long ago that her work would speak for itself far more effectively than any words. "What's that tattoo supposed to be anyway?" the man asked, pointing at her exposed forearm. "Some kind of biker gang thing? I hope you're not mixed up in anything illegal. I don't want criminals touching my boat." This time, Sarah paused in her work and looked up at him directly. "It's not a gang tattoo," she said quietly. "And I'm not a criminal." The man crossed his arms, clearly unsatisfied with her answer. "Well, what is it then? People don't get tattoos like that unless they're trying to look tough or intimidating. Decent people don't mark up their bodies like that." Before Sarah could respond, Frank Henderson's voice boomed across the dock. "Martinez, how's that fuel pump replacement coming along?" "Almost finished, Mr. Henderson," Sarah called back. "Should have her running in about 15 minutes. Frank approached, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was a barrel-chested man with salt and pepper hair and forearms like tree trunks, earned from 40 years of marine repair work. Good. Mr. Carlson here has been chomping at the bit to get back on the water. Mr. Carlson, the boat owner, immediately began complaining to Frank. I'm not comfortable with her working on my boat. She looks like she belongs in a biker bar, not a respectable marina. What do you really know about her background? Frank's expression darkened. He had always been protective of his employees, especially the good ones. And Sarah was proving to be one of the best mechanics he had ever hired. I know she's got more skill in her little finger than most mechanics have in their whole body. I know she shows up early, works hard, and treats every boat like it's her own. What more do I need to know? But look at her, Mr. Carlson insisted, pointing at Sarah's tattoo again. Decent people don't mark themselves up like that. How do you know she won't steal something or damage the boat out of spite? Frank stepped closer to Mr. Carlson, his voice low and dangerous. That woman has never given me a single reason to doubt her integrity. She's polite, professional, and damn good at her job. If you've got a problem with how she looks, you can take your business elsewhere. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward her boss, but she also noticed that several other customers and marina workers had gathered around, drawn by the raised voices. She could see the familiar mixture of curiosity and judgment in their eyes as they looked at her tattoo. I'm just saying, Mr. Carlson continued, though his voice had lost some of its bluster in the face of Frank's defense. In my day, people who looked like that were trouble. That tattoo probably means she was in prison or involved with drugs or something worse. You don't know what you're talking about, Frank said firmly. Now, do you want your boat fixed or not? Sarah returned to her work, trying to block out the whispered conversations happening around her. She installed the new fuel pump with quick, precise movements, then ran the engine through a series of tests to ensure everything was working properly. The boat purified like a contented cat, all traces of the previous engine problems gone. All finished, she announced, closing the engine compartment and wiping her hands clean. She should run smooth as silk now. Frank tested the engine himself, nodding with approval at the quiet, steady rumble. Perfect work, Martinez. Mr. Carlson, your boat is ready. Mr. Carlson grudgingly paid his bill, but not without one final parting shot. Just remember, Henderson, you're judged by the company you keep. That girl is going to hurt your reputation with decent people. After he left, Frank shook his head in disgust. Don't pay any attention to that fool, Sarah. Small-town people can be narrow-minded sometimes. It's okay, Mr. Henderson. I'm used to it by now. Well, you shouldn't have to be, Frank replied. You're one of the best mechanics I've ever worked with. Anyone with half a brain can see that after watching you work for 5 minutes. As the day continued, Sarah noticed that word had spread about the confrontation. Several other marina customers found excuses to walk past her work area, stealing glances at her tattoo and whispering among themselves. She caught fragments of conversations speculating about her background, her character, and what the tattoo might represent. During her lunch break, Sarah sat alone on a bench overlooking the harbor, eating a sandwich she had packed from home. The peaceful view of sailboats and fishing vessels should have been relaxing, but she found herself thinking about the pattern that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. In the 6 months since she had moved to Millbrook, she had encountered this same scenario dozens of times. People would see her tattoo, make assumptions about her character, and treat her accordingly. She had been asked to leave restaurants, denied service at stores, and subjected to countless lectures about cleaning up her act from well-meaning strangers who knew nothing about her life or experiences. The most frustrating part was that she couldn't explain the truth without revealing things she wasn't ready to share. The tattoo on her forearm was indeed military-related, but it represented something far more complex and meaningful than anyone in this sleepy coastal town could possibly understand. A group of teenagers walked past her bench, and she heard one of them whisper, "That's the girl with the scary tattoo. My mom says she's probably dangerous." Sarah finished her sandwich in silence, watching a pelican dive for fish in the harbor. She had chosen Millbrook because she thought a small, quiet town would help her adjust to civilian life. After 12 years in the military and 3 combat deployments, she needed peace and anonymity to work through the challenges of her transition. Instead, she had found that small towns came with their own unique form of scrutiny. In the city, people were too busy to stare at strangers. Here, everyone noticed everything, and her tattoo made her as conspicuous as a lighthouse beacon. When she returned to work, Frank had another boat waiting for her, a sleek sailboat with navigation system problems. The owner was a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had apparently already heard about the earlier incident. "I hope you don't mind me asking, Mrs." Patterson said as Sarah began diagnosing the navigation system. "But what exactly does your tattoo represent? My husband seems to think it's some kind of gang symbol, and honestly, it makes me a bit nervous." Sarah looked up from the electronic display she was examining. Mrs. Patterson seemed genuinely curious rather than hostile, which was refreshing. "It's not a gang symbol," Sarah said carefully. "It represents service to country." "Oh," Mrs. Patterson said, looking somewhat relieved. "Like military service? My nephew is in the army." "Were you in the military too?" Sarah nodded, returning her attention to the navigation system. "Yes, ma'am. 12 years. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for your service. I wish more people knew that. I think there are some unfortunate assumptions being made about you around town. People see what they want to see," Sarah replied diplomatically, having located the problem with the GPS antenna. As she worked on the navigation system, Sarah found herself thinking about her decision to get the tattoo in the first place. She had been young and proud when she earned the right to wear those symbols, and the tattoo had seemed like a natural way to honor her achievements and remember her fallen comrades. She had never anticipated how differently the tattoo would be perceived in civilian life, especially in a conservative small town where military service wasn't as common or visible. The irony was that the very people who claimed to support the troops were often the most suspicious of her when they saw her ink. The navigation repair took most of the afternoon, requiring her to trace wiring through several compartments and replace a corroded connection. When she finally got the system working properly, Mrs. Patterson was effusive in her praise. "You certainly know what you're doing," Mrs. Patterson said, watching Sarah test all the navigation functions. "My husband owes you an apology for jumping to conclusions. I'll make sure to set the record straight with our friends." Sarah appreciated the gesture, though she knew that one person's good word wouldn't necessarily change the broader perceptions in town. Change happened slowly in places like Millbrook, and first impressions tended to stick. As closing time approached, Frank called Sarah into his small office overlooking the marina. The walls were covered with photos of boats he had worked on over the years, and the desk was buried under invoices, parts catalogs, and coffee-stained charts. "Sit down, Sarah," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened today." Sarah settled into the chair, wondering if the confrontation with Mr. Carlson had created problems she didn't know about. "If this is about the customer complaint, I understand if you need to." Frank held up a hand to stop her. "This isn't about any complaint. Carlson can take his business elsewhere if he doesn't like how I run my shop. I wanted to talk to you about something else." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with kind but serious eyes. "I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've seen all kinds of people come and go. You're different from most of the mechanics I've hired. Better. More focused. You work like someone who's used to high-stakes situations." Sarah remained silent, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I don't ask about people's backgrounds unless it affects their work," Frank continued. "But I'm curious about yours. That tattoo means something specific, doesn't it? Something more than just generic military service." Sarah considered her response carefully. Frank had been nothing but supportive since she started working for him, and he deserved honesty. "It represents specialized military service," she said finally. "The kind that most people don't know much about." Frank nodded slowly. "I figured it was something like that. You handle yourself like someone who's seen serious action. The way you stay calm under pressure, the way you analyze problems systematically, the way you're always aware of your surroundings. Those aren't skills you learn in basic training." "I prefer not to talk about my service," Sarah said quietly. "I'm trying to focus on civilian life now." "I respect that," Frank said. "But I want you to know that whatever you did over there, I'm grateful for it. And if anyone else gives you trouble about that tattoo, you send them to me. I don't tolerate ignorance in my shop. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the day's events. Frank's support meant more to her than he probably realized. But she knew that not everyone in Millbrook would be so understanding. She had chosen this town specifically because it seemed like a place where she could blend in and heal from the psychological wounds of combat. Instead, her tattoo had made her a target for exactly the kind of attention she was trying to avoid. Every day brought new encounters with people who saw her ink and made immediate judgments about her character, her background, and her worth as a person. The small apartment she rented was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by pine trees and far enough from her neighbors to provide the solitude she craved. As she sat on her small deck with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over the forest, Sarah found herself questioning whether Millbrook was really the right place for her fresh start. The tattoo on her forearm caught the last rays of sunlight, and she traced the intricate design with her fingertip. The wings, the trident, the anchor. Each element represented years of training, sacrifice, and service that very few people would ever understand. She had earned every line of that ink through blood, sweat, and dedication that had taken her to the darkest corners of the world. But in Millbrook, it was just a mark that made people uncomfortable. A signal that she didn't belong in their safe, predictable world. Tomorrow would bring more stares, more whispered comments, more assumptions about who she was and what she represented. Sarah finished her tea and went inside, already planning her strategy for handling whatever judgment tomorrow might bring. She had survived far worse than small-town prejudice, and she wasn't about to let ignorant opinions drive her away from the peaceful life she was trying to build. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had spent years defending the very freedom that allowed these people to judge her so harshly. But that was a burden she would carry alone, at least for now. The truth about what her tattoo really represented, and what she had sacrificed to earn it, was not something she was ready to share with a world that had already made up its mind about her. 3 weeks after the incident at the marina, Sarah's reputation in Millbrook had become a topic of heated debate. Half the town saw her as a skilled mechanic who kept their boats running smoothly, while the other half remained convinced that her tattoo marked her as someone to avoid. The division came to a head during the weekly town council meeting, where Sarah found herself the unwitting subject of public discussion. She hadn't intended to attend the meeting, but Frank Henderson had asked her to come along to discuss a proposal for expanding the marina's services. As they sat in the back of the crowded community center, Sarah listened with growing discomfort as several residents voiced their concerns about undesirable elements in their peaceful town. Margaret Whitfield, a local real estate agent and self-appointed guardian of Millbrook's reputation, stood to address the council. I've received numerous complaints from potential homebuyers about the atmosphere downtown. Specifically, there are concerns about individuals whose appearance suggests involvement in criminal activities. Though Margaret didn't mention Sarah by name, everyone in the room understood the reference. Sarah felt dozens of eyes turning toward her, and she fought the urge to leave immediately. Now, Margaret, Mayor Thompson said diplomatically, we can't judge people based solely on their appearance. That's not what Millbrook represents. I'm not talking about judgment, Margaret replied, her voice carrying across the room. I'm talking about property values and community safety. When visitors see people covered in gang tattoos walking around our town, it sends the wrong message about the kind of place we are. Frank Henderson rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. That's enough, Margaret. Sarah Martinez is one of the most professional and skilled workers in this town. Your ignorance is showing. The room erupted in murmurs as supporters and detractors chose sides. Sarah noticed that several people were pulling out their phones to record the confrontation, and she realized this argument would be all over social media within hours. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a retired college professor who had recently moved to Millbrook, stood to speak. I've lived in many communities over the years, and I can tell you that judging people by their appearance is not only wrong, it's often spectacularly inaccurate. Perhaps we should focus on character and contribution rather than personal aesthetics. Easy for you to say, called out Bob Mitchell, who owned the hardware store. You don't have a business to protect. When customers see someone like that in your shop, they start to wonder what kind of establishment you're running. Sarah had heard enough. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. "If I may," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its soft tone. The room fell silent immediately. "I understand that my appearance makes some people uncomfortable," Sarah continued, looking around the room calmly. "I never intended to become a controversial figure in this community. I came here to work hard and live quietly. I've never caused any trouble, never committed any crime, and never given anyone reason to fear me, except for how I look." Margaret Whitfield crossed her arms defensively. "Well, what exactly does that tattoo represent then? If it's not gang-related, what is it?" Sarah paused, considering how much to reveal. The truth would certainly change how people saw her, but it might also bring the kind of attention she had moved to Millbrook to avoid. "It represents military service," she said finally. "Specifically, Naval Special Operations." The silence in the room deepened. Several people leaned forward in their seats, suddenly interested in a way they hadn't been before. "What kind of Naval Special Operations?" asked Councilmember Davis, a Vietnam veteran himself. Sarah met his eyes directly. "The kind that most people don't know exists and wouldn't believe if they did." Before anyone could ask follow-up questions, she continued, "I didn't come here tonight to discuss my military record. I came to support Mr. Henderson's proposal for marina expansion. But since my presence has apparently become a community issue, let me be clear, I'm here to stay. I have every right to live and work in this town, regardless of what some people think about my appearance." She gathered her things and walked toward the exit, ignoring the buzz of conversation that erupted behind her. Frank caught up with her in the parking lot, shaking his head in disgust. "I'm sorry about that circus in there," he said. "Margaret Whitfield has always been a busybody, but that was out of line even for her." Sarah unlocked her truck, a modest but well-maintained vehicle that reflected her practical nature. "It's not your fault, Mr. Henderson. I should have expected this eventually. Small towns talk, and I'm an easy target. You handled yourself well in there," Frank observed. "Most people would have lost their temper or gotten defensive. You stayed calm and spoke the truth." "Getting angry wouldn't have helped," Sarah replied. "It would have just confirmed what some people already think about me." As she drove home, Sarah's phone began buzzing with text messages. Word about the town meeting was already spreading, and apparently, several people had posted videos of the confrontation on social media. She turned off her phone without reading the messages, unwilling to deal with the inevitable speculation about what kind of special operations she had been involved in. The next morning at work, Sarah found that the town meeting had indeed become the talk of Millbrook. Several customers approached her with questions about her military service, most of them genuinely curious rather than hostile. The shift in tone was noticeable, though not universal. "So, you were really in the Navy?" asked Jenny Morrison, whose husband's fishing boat Sarah was servicing. "My brother was in the Navy too, but he was just a regular sailor." "What did you do exactly?" Sarah looked up from the engine she was tuning. "I can't discuss specific operations or missions, Mrs. Morrison. That information is classified. But you can say what your job was, right? I mean, generally speaking?" Sarah considered her response carefully. "I was part of a unit that handled situations other forces couldn't manage. High-risk operations in dangerous areas." Jenny's eyes widened with interest. "Like Navy SEALs?" Sarah returned her attention to the engine without answering directly, but her silence spoke volumes. Jenny backed away respectfully, suddenly understanding that she was in the presence of someone whose experiences were far beyond anything she could imagine. Throughout the day, Sarah noticed a change in how people interacted with her. The revelation about her military background had created a new dynamic. Some people seemed more respectful, even deferential, while others appeared more suspicious than before. The idea that a trained Special Forces operator was working quietly among them was both reassuring and unsettling to different segments of the community. During her lunch break, Sarah was approached by Tom Chen, a local police officer she had occasionally seen around town. He was young and earnest, with the bearing of someone who took his job seriously. "Miss Martinez, I'm Officer Chen with Millbrook PD. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to introduce myself properly. I heard about the town meeting last night. Sarah looked up from the technical manual she was reading. Is there a problem, Officer Chen? Not at all, he said quickly. Actually, I wanted to thank you for your service. My grandfather served in the Pacific during World War II, and he always said that the people who do the hardest jobs are usually the ones who talk about them the least. Your grandfather was a wise man, Sarah replied simply. Tom Chen hesitated, then continued. I also wanted you to know that there's been some talk around town since last night. Nothing serious, but some people are curious about your background. If anyone gives you trouble or makes you feel unwelcome, I hope you'll call the department. I appreciate that, Officer Chen, but I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can, he said with a slight smile. But sometimes having the badge on your side makes things easier. We respect what you've done for the country, and we want you to feel safe and welcome here. That afternoon, Sarah was working on a particularly complex electrical problem when she noticed a crowd gathering on the main dock. Through the marina's office window, she could see people pointing toward the harbor entrance, where a large gray vessel was approaching. Frank Henderson appeared at her workstation, grinning broadly. Sarah, you're going to want to see this. There's a Navy ship coming into harbor. First time in 20 years that we've had a military vessel visit Millbrook. Sarah looked up from the wiring diagram she was studying. What kind of ship? Looks like a destroyer from here, but it's hard to tell. They called ahead to request docking space for a few days. Said they wanted to give the crew some shore leave and resupply. Despite herself, Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Military vessels brought military personnel. And military personnel might recognize things about her that civilians couldn't. She had worked hard to blend into the civilian world, and the arrival of active-duty sailors threatened to complicate that effort. I'll finish this electrical work and then head home early if that's okay, Sarah said, returning to her task with increased focus. Sure thing, Frank replied, though he looked puzzled by her sudden urgency. Everything all right? Everything's fine. I just prefer to avoid crowds when possible. As Sarah worked to complete her repairs, she could hear the sounds of the Navy ship maneuvering into the harbor. The deep rumble of its engines, the shouted commands from the crew, and the mechanical sounds of docking procedures brought back memories she usually kept carefully locked away. By the time she finished her work, the destroyer was securely tied to the main pier, and dozens of sailors in their dress blue uniforms were beginning to come ashore. Sarah kept her head down as she packed her tools, hoping to slip away without drawing attention to herself. Her plan almost worked. She had made it to the marina parking lot when she heard a voice call out behind her. Hey, Martinez. Sarah froze, recognizing the tone of authority in the voice. She turned slowly to see a tall African-American officer in navy dress blues walking toward her, his rank insignia identifying him as a lieutenant commander. Behind him followed several other officers and enlisted personnel. I thought that was you, the officer said with a broad smile. Rodriguez told me you might be in this area, but I couldn't believe it when I saw you working on that boat. Sarah's mind raced, trying to place the face and calculate the implications of this encounter. The officer looked familiar, but she couldn't immediately identify him or determine how much he knew about her background. I'm sorry, sir, she said carefully. I think you have me confused with someone else. The lieutenant commander laughed. Not likely. Sarah Martinez, right? We served together on the USS Hampton about 6 years ago. I was just a lieutenant then. Fresh out of the academy. You probably don't remember me, but you saved my career during that incident in the Gulf. Sarah felt her carefully constructed civilian identity beginning to crumble. Several marina customers and workers had noticed the interaction and were openly staring at the scene. She could see cell phones coming out again, ready to record whatever happened next. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, she said quietly, finally placing his face. Good to see you again, sir. Please. Call me David. We're both out of uniform here. He gestured to her work clothes and smiled, though I have to say, you look like you've found your calling in the civilian world. Frank Henderson tells me you're the best mechanic he's ever hired. You know, Mr. Henderson? We just met when we docked. He couldn't stop talking about his star employee. Imagine my surprise when he described you and mentioned that tattoo. David glanced at her forearm, where the edge of her tattoo was visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve. That's some serious ink you're wearing. Not many people earn the right to those symbols. Sarah became acutely aware that their conversation was attracting more attention. Several of the Navy personnel had stopped to listen, and the crowd of civilian onlookers was growing larger. She could see Margaret Whitfield among them, her expression a mixture of confusion and intense curiosity. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private, Sarah suggested. Of course, David agreed, suddenly realizing the spectacle they were creating. But first, let me ask you something. Are you planning to attend the memorial ceremony tomorrow? We're honoring the crew of the USS Fitzgerald, and I know how much that mission meant to you. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The mention of the Fitzgerald brought back memories she had spent months trying to suppress through therapy and medication. The mission David was referring to had been classified at the highest levels, and its aftermath had changed the course of her entire career. I don't attend military ceremonies anymore, she said quietly. I'm trying to focus on civilian life now. David's expression grew more serious as he recognized the pain in her voice. I understand. But Sarah, you should know that what you did on that mission, what you sacrificed, it mattered. It saved lives and prevented something much worse from happening. The crowd of onlookers pressed closer, straining to hear every word. Sarah could see phones recording the conversation, and she knew that within hours, speculation about her military background would explode across social media and local gossip networks. I need to go, Sarah said, backing toward her truck. It was good to see you again, David. Sarah, wait, David called out. But she was already climbing into her vehicle. As she drove away, she could see him standing in the marina parking lot, surrounded by curious civilians and his own crew members, probably regretting the public nature of their reunion. That evening, Sarah's phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, bloggers, and military enthusiasts who had somehow obtained her number. The videos from the marina had already been posted online, and speculation about her identity and background was spreading rapidly through military forums and social media groups. She turned off her phone and sat on her deck, watching the sunset and trying to process how quickly her carefully constructed anonymous life had unraveled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as people began to piece together the truth about who she really was and what she had done during her military service. The tattoo on her forearm seemed to pulse with significance in the dying light. Soon, everyone in Millbrook would know what those symbols really meant, and Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready for the consequences of that revelation. The peaceful anonymity she had sought was about to disappear forever, replaced by a level of scrutiny and attention she had moved here specifically to avoid. As darkness fell over the harbor, Sarah could see the lights of the Navy destroyer twinkling in the distance, a reminder of the world she had tried to leave behind but could never fully escape. The next morning brought chaos to Sarah's previously quiet life. Her phone had been buzzing since 5 a.m. with calls from military journalists, veteran advocacy groups, and even a producer from a national television show. Someone had identified her from the marina video and connected her name to partially declassified mission reports that painted a picture of extraordinary heroism under fire. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, drinking black coffee and staring at the printouts she had reluctantly pulled from her personal files. The official commendations, the classified mission summaries, the medical reports from her recovery, documents she had hoped never to need again in civilian life. But Lieutenant Commander Brooks' public recognition had opened a door she couldn't close, and now she needed to decide how much truth she was willing to reveal. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she could see Frank Henderson standing on her small porch, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Morning, Sarah," he said when she opened the door. "Mind if I come in? We need to talk." She gestured him inside, noting that he seemed unusually formal. "Coffee? Thanks." Frank settled into one of her two kitchen chairs, his large frame making the modest furniture look even smaller. "I've been getting calls all morning. Reporters asking about you, government officials wanting to confirm details about your employment. Even the mayor called to ask what I know about my mysterious employee." Sarah poured him a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. "I'm sorry this is affecting the marina. If you need me to, Stop right there, Frank interrupted. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to help me understand what's happening so I can protect both you and my business from whatever storm is coming. Sarah appreciated his directness. Frank Henderson had always been a straight shooter, and she owed him honesty in return. What do you want to know? Let's start with what that tattoo really represents. Not the general special operations answer you gave at the town meeting. The real answer. Sarah rolled up her sleeve fully for the first time since moving to Millbrook, revealing the complete design. The intricate artwork showed wings wrapped around a trident, with an anchor beneath, and a small submarine silhouette at the base. Above it all, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, were 3 small stars. Frank studied the tattoo carefully, his expression growing more serious as he recognized the significance of each element. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. "You weren't just special ops. You were SDV." Sarah nodded slowly. SDV, SEAL Delivery Vehicle Teams, represented the most elite and secretive branch of naval special operations. Their missions were so classified that most Navy personnel didn't even know they existed. "The 3 stars?" Frank asked, pointing to the small symbols above the main design. 3 successful deep penetration missions behind enemy lines, Sarah said quietly. Each one classified at levels that will probably never be declassified. Frank leaned back in his chair, suddenly understanding why his skilled mechanic moved with such precise efficiency and maintained such rigid personal discipline. The USS Fitzgerald mission that Navy officer mentioned yesterday, that was one of them? Sarah's expression darkened. The worst one. And the last one. Before Frank could ask for details, another knock came at the door. Through the window, Sarah could see 2 men in expensive suits. Clearly not locals. Federal agents. She realized immediately, recognizing the bearing and dress of government officials. "Miss Martinez." The older agent showed his badge through the window. "FBI. We need to speak with you about recent media attention regarding classified operations." Sarah opened the door, unsurprised by their appearance. "Gentlemen, I've been expecting you." The agents entered her small living room, their professional demeanor evident as they assessed the modest apartment and its occupant. The senior agent, a graying man named Patterson, took the lead. "Miss Martinez, I'm sure you're aware that certain details about your naval service have begun circulating online. We're here to discuss the security implications and remind you of your ongoing obligations regarding classified information." "I haven't revealed any classified details," Sarah said firmly. "I've only confirmed my general service record." "We understand that," Agent Patterson replied. "But the situation has escalated beyond your control. Media outlets are connecting dots and making educated guesses about operations that remain highly classified. We need your cooperation to manage this situation." Frank Henderson stood up, his protective instincts activated. "What exactly are you asking her to do?" The younger agent, Williams, answered. "We'd prefer if Miss Martinez would agree to a brief interview to set the record straight, confirm her service, express pride in her work, but redirect attention away from specific operational details." "And if I refuse?" Sarah asked. "That's your right," Patterson said carefully. "But the alternative is allowing speculation and conspiracy theories to fill the void. That serves no one's interests, including yours." Sarah considered the options. None of them appealing. Her phone buzzed with another incoming call, which she ignored. "Where would this interview take place?" "We've arranged for a press conference this afternoon at the marina," Williams said. "Public location, controlled environment. Your boss present for support if you want him there." Frank nodded approvingly. "I'll be there either way." Sarah's earned the right to have people know who she really is. After the agents left, Sarah spent the morning preparing for something she had never imagined facing, publicly discussing her military service in front of the same community that had spent months judging her based on assumptions and prejudice. At 2 o'clock, the Millbrook Marina was packed with people. Local residents, mixed with reporters, military personnel from the visiting destroyer, and federal officials. Sarah arrived in her best civilian clothes. Simple slacks and a button-down shirt that she left untucked to partially conceal her tattoo. The crowd parted as she walked toward the makeshift podium that had been set up on the main dock. She could see familiar faces from around town, including Margaret Whitfield, who looked distinctly uncomfortable, and Officer Chen, who gave her an encouraging nod. But it was the group of uniformed military personnel that caught her attention. Lieutenant Commander Brooks was there, along with several other officers she didn't recognize, and standing slightly apart from the group, watching her with intense interest, was a tall man in navy dress blues, whose rank insignia marked him as a full commander. Agent Patterson introduced Sarah briefly, then stepped aside to let her speak. She approached the microphone, looking out at the crowd of faces, some friendly, some curious, some still skeptical. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the marina. "6 months ago, I moved to Millbrook because I wanted to live quietly and work with my hands. I wanted to be judged by what I did, not by what people thought about how I looked." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Many of you made assumptions about me based on my tattoo. Some of you decided I was dangerous, or criminal, or somehow not worthy of being part of this community. I understand why you reacted that way. In your experience, people with tattoos like mine might indeed be trouble." A murmur ran through the crowd as people shifted uncomfortably. "But you were wrong about what my tattoo represents," Sarah continued. "These symbols don't mark me as a criminal. They mark me as someone who spent 12 years defending this country in ways that most people can't imagine, and in places that don't appear on any public map." She rolled up her sleeve fully, displaying the complete tattoo for everyone to see. "These wings represent naval aviation training. This trident represents completion of SEAL qualification. This anchor represents naval service. And this submarine silhouette represents assignment to the most classified underwater operations unit in the United States military." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. The 3 stars above these symbols represent 3 successful missions deep behind enemy lines. Missions that prevented terrorist attacks on American soil, rescued captured personnel, and eliminated threats that could have killed thousands of innocent people. Sarah looked directly at Margaret Whitfield as she continued. "So yes, I am marked. I am different from most people in this community. But not because I'm dangerous to law-abiding citizens. I'm different because I volunteered to face dangers that most people never have to think about, so that places like Millbrook can remain safe and peaceful." The tall commander she had noticed earlier suddenly stepped forward from the group of military personnel. The crowd turned to watch as he approached the podium, his bearing radiating authority and respect. "Ma'am," he said, stopping directly in front of Sarah and coming to rigid attention. "Commander Marcus Webb, SEAL Team 6. Permission to address you." Sarah stiffened, recognizing both the unit designation and the name. Marcus Webb was a legend in the special operations community, a man whose own classified achievements had made him something approaching mythical status among those who knew about such things. "Granted," Sarah said formally, falling into military bearing herself. Commander Webb's voice carried across the silent marina as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of one of the most decorated female special operations personnel in United States Navy history. Sarah Martinez didn't just serve in classified missions, she led them. She didn't just face danger. She volunteered for the most dangerous assignments available." He turned to face Sarah directly. "The Fitzgerald mission that saved 17 American hostages from a terrorist stronghold in Somalia. The submarine infiltration that prevented a chemical weapons attack on the port of Los Angeles. The underwater demolition operation that stopped an enemy submarine from mining San Diego Harbor." With each mission he named, Sarah's expression grew more tense, and the crowd's understanding of who they had been judging became clearer. Each of these operations was considered impossible by conventional military standards. Commander Webb continued. Each required volunteers willing to accept a probability of death exceeding 50%. And each was successful because Petty Officer First Class Sarah Martinez refused to accept failure as an option. He paused, then continued with obvious emotion in his voice. The Fitzgerald mission ended Miss Martinez's active service because she sustained injuries, saving the lives of her entire team. She could have left those hostages to die and brought her people home safely. Instead, she chose to complete the mission regardless of personal cost. Commander Webb stepped back and rendered a crisp military salute. "Ma'am, it is an honor to serve in the same Navy as you." The effect on the crowd was immediate and profound. Every active-duty military person present snapped to attention and saluted. Frank Henderson, though he had never served, removed his cap and placed it over his heart. Officer Chen stood at attention in respect, but it was the reaction of the civilian crowd that truly drove home the transformation. Margaret Whitfield had tears running down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Bob Mitchell from the hardware store was shaking his head in what appeared to be shame. Dozens of people who had whispered about Sarah's tattoo over the past months now looked at her with expressions of awe and gratitude. Sarah returned Commander Webb's salute, then addressed the crowd one final time. "I didn't want this attention. I didn't want to be seen as different or special. I just wanted to live and work among good people who judge others by their character and actions, not by their appearance or assumptions." She looked around the marina, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "I hope that today you've learned something about the danger of judging others based on superficial characteristics. The person you assume is trouble might actually be the person who has sacrificed the most to protect you." As the press conference ended and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, apologize for their previous assumptions, and express their gratitude for her service. Margaret Whitfield was among the first to approach. "Miss Martinez," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you the most profound apology. I made horrible assumptions about you, and I said things that were completely unjustified. I am so sorry." Sarah accepted the apology graciously, understanding that Margaret's reaction came from ignorance rather than malice. "We all make assumptions sometimes, Mrs. Whitfield. What matters is that we're willing to change our minds when we learn new information." Over the following weeks, life in Millbrook transformed for Sarah in ways she never could have anticipated. The story of the mysterious tattooed mechanic, who turned out to be a decorated special operations hero, spread far beyond the small coastal town, bringing national attention to themes of prejudice, sacrifice, and hidden heroism. But more importantly for Sarah's daily life, the community that had once viewed her with suspicion now embraced her as one of their most valued residents. Business at the marina increased as people came specifically to meet the famous mechanic. The town council passed a resolution honoring her service, and the local high school asked her to speak to students about overcoming obstacles and serving something greater than themselves. Frank Henderson installed a small plaque at her workstation. "Sarah Martinez, Master Marine Mechanic and American Hero." She protested the designation, but Frank insisted it stay. "Heroes don't always look like we expect them to," he told her. "Sometimes they look like a quiet woman with a tattoo who just wants to fix boats and live in peace. But that doesn't make them any less heroic." The most meaningful change, however, was personal. For the first time since leaving the military, Sarah felt truly at home in a community, not because people finally knew about her service record, but because they had learned to look beyond surface appearances and appreciate the person beneath. Her tattoo no longer drew stares of suspicion or whispered comments about criminal behavior. Instead, it served as a reminder to an entire community about the courage and sacrifice of people who serve in roles that most civilians never see or acknowledge. Commander Webb had been right when he said she was marked as someone different. But the marks that truly mattered weren't the ones visible on her skin. They were the invisible marks left by her willingness to serve others regardless of personal cost. And in Millbrook, those marks had finally been recognized for what they truly represented: honor, courage, and selfless dedication to protecting others. Sarah Martinez had found her home at last. Not by hiding who she was, but by helping others understand that heroes don't always fit the expected mold. Sometimes, they're quiet mechanics, with mysterious tattoos, working anonymously among us while carrying secrets of extraordinary courage and sacrifice. The small coastal town of Millbrook learned a valuable lesson about the danger of assumptions and the importance of looking deeper than surface appearances. And Sarah learned that home isn't just a place where you're accepted despite your differences, It's a place where those differences are recognized, honored, and valued as part of what makes the community stronger.